This is Jerome Corsi, and this is our second day of a new podcast, and I'm going to be back. I'm now going to podcast every day. I'm writing much more actively. I've decided to become active again with everything going on. I want to get back into commenting. I was with Mueller there trying to imprison me for a while. I needed to take a break. Of course, I was not indicted. And my case, I think, shut down Mueller's investigation. But and I wrote a book about that called Silent No More. At any rate, I want today to cover some economics and some climate change issues. First, I want to get into the climate change issues because there's a lot that is really breaking on these climate change matters right now. And this is going to be a continuous process. So let me go here to the first article I want to cover, which has a lot to do with what the United Nations is doing. The United Nations International, it's the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Policy Committee of the UN, is basically issuing a new alarmist report. And these are followed by the left all around the world because the UN is now saying that we are on the brink of a catastrophic warming. Because what the UN has said is that if this international policy, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Policy Committee, Climate Committee of the UN, is basically having a target. They're saying that we have to reduce carbon dioxide otherwise and dramatically. They have ambitious goals in order to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial temperatures. Now, let me explain how this all works in terms of what the UN is doing. The UN is basically saying here that we are burning hydrocarbon fuels, which emit carbon dioxide. Now, Chris, if you can show my book cover, because this is really, I've covered this in a major book I've written, which is The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change. The book has done extremely well, got excellent reviews, a lot of science in it, and it shows that this is a Malthusian communist agenda really trying to reduce the world's population. But this new study here from the UN is important because they're saying we're not meeting the goals. We're not reducing enough hydrocarbon fuels. Now, first of all, carbon dioxide is something we exhale. And what my book demonstrates, and you've got to get into some of the science. Carbon dioxide is a trace molecule in the atmosphere. It covers very little of the atmosphere, 0.004. I mean, it's minuscule. Water vapor is a much more important greenhouse gas. But the left demonizes carbon dioxide because hydrocarbon fuels emit carbon dioxide. Actually, carbon dioxide is something that we exhale and plants absorb. The earth is actually greener and warmer is good. I mean, if you want another ice age, it's going to be tough for people to survive in the quantity of people we have on the earth right now. And the left knows that. The left wants us to quit using hydrocarbon fuels because that's their new way to kill capitalism. And that's been the primary move of the left right now since Karl Marx, and it's intensifying with a threat that we'll all die if we don't do what they say, namely quit using hydrocarbon fuels. And they want us to have, they're going to cut back on gas stoves. They're going to re-engineer our ability to use appliances, even washing machines, to be less efficient. They want everybody to drive an electric car, which still takes a lot of hydrocarbon fuels to manufacture, to produce the electricity. They're very inefficient. The left knows that hydrocarbon fuels are essential to a modern industrial society. It's why they want to eliminate them. But the point is that we are in a cycle here, a very dark cycle, in which the left is in control of the institutions, and this woke agenda is one that becomes a secular religion. That's really what's happening. But if we read, if I get into the article and that I posted, they're basically saying, I'm going to read you some of the Washington Post story from which this comes. They say human activities have already transformed the planet at a pace and a scale unmatched in recorded history, the IPCC said. It's not true. The Earth has been warmer many times and it's been colder many times. The Earth has a cycle of going into ice ages. The orbit of the Earth around the sun right at the moment is probably about its most circular. It gets elliptical like an egg. We get farther from the sun in our most distant point in this orbit around the sun about every 100,000 years. That's when we have an ice age. We will have another one. It may not come around for another 10,000 years. It's not necessarily something you need to worry about. But the idea that emitting a little more carbon dioxide is going to produce a crisis is ridiculous. So they say, yet carbon emissions, global emissions continue to rise, and current carbon cutting efforts are wildly insufficient to basically ward off climate catastrophe. Well, again, it's just not true. I'll start posting here some articles that demonstrate to you that, in fact, we have fewer climate catastrophes. We're better able to handle them right now. The Earth is actually more stable in the current orbit and in the current interglacial warming period. But if you understand the climate science, the whole idea that carbon dioxide is this knob of the Earth's temperature is ridiculous. Okay, now but yet the report says how to defuse the climate time bomb. And they're blaming emergency economies like China and India. But the IPCC, instead of criticizing China, which is opening up new coal plants all the time, they say, well, China is going to reach its net zero in 2060 and India in 2070, net zero carbon emissions. In other words, we are reducing the carbon dioxide emissions to zero. We're taking carbon out of the atmosphere. We're not emitting as much. This whole agenda is really to re-engineer a climate that is doing just fine. And the mathematics of the climate, the whole science of the climate is more affected by issues we can't control. The oceans have a great deal to do with how the climate affects. Different currents in the ocean affect Earth's temperature. But we've had far more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere during ice ages. And if that's why the books I'm writing on this, the left does not want you to see. But let's go to the second article here. And the second article, again, is another alarmist article. This one is basically, again, saying that there are more climate deniers that are being replaced by climate doomers. Okay, now, what that means is, and again, this is another bizarre kind of argument, but it is what is happening. Again, it comes from another Washington Post article. These are both written by Shannon Osaka. And what she is saying in this article in the Washington Post is that there are a lot of people who grew up watching this climate change, global warming debate. And what they are fearing, they were raising a generation that is indoctrinated with this idea, that they're horrified by what we've learned about melting ice and rising extreme weather. So she begins her article talking about someone who has spent hours on YouTube watching videos made by fringe scientists who warned that the world was teetering on the edge of societal collapse. Okay, now he became a climate doomer. In other words, we're doomed. And she writes, the grim view that the planet's future is becoming more common, influenced by a barrage of grim UN reports, such as the one published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change earlier this week with negative headlines. So a group of people believe that the climate problem cannot or will not be solved in time to prevent an all-out social collapse. They are known as climate doomers. And some scientists and experts worry that their defeatism, which could undermine efforts to take action, may be as dangerous as climate denial. Okay, now instead of saying that these people are wrong on the science, what the Washington Post is worried about is that climate doomers may actually make it harder for the Biden administration and the United Nations to get the green agenda in place. Because if you think that we're doomed, because of society, too many people, Malthusian fear, then why bother going green? Because it's not going to save anything. Well, that's not what the left wants you to believe. The left wants you to believe that we've got a crisis only if capitalism remains in place. If we eliminate capitalism, if we reduce our industrial activity, that's the whole point of going back to a pre-industrial level. They want you to believe that the Earth had a very stable environment up until the Industrial Revolution. We started burning hydrocarbon fuels, and that's where this hockey stick, the Michael Mann graph, which was rigged with fake data, and I've demonstrated that again and again, went through all the mathematics of the argument, how Michael Mann rigged the data, ClimateGate, emails proved that it was rigged. But yet, this is the persistent image that the United Nations wants to give you. We had very stable, everything was rosy until the industrial age, and then like a hockey stick, the blade shot up, and we suddenly have global warming. And that's going to be catastrophic because there's the hockey stick right there. And you see how what they did was they took the data and they erased, for instance, the medieval warming period, or a cold streak of actually a mini ice age that occurred in the Napoleonic era, when Napoleon invaded Russia. His troops froze coming out of Russia because the Earth was extremely cold. Take a look at the pictures of George Washington crossing the Delaware River in the Revolutionary War. You see big ice flows all over the Delaware River. Well, the Delaware River doesn't freeze like that right now because we're not in a little ice age. The Earth's temperature is influenced by many, many different things, including not our distance from the sun, the nature of the orbit, the oceans and how they're behaving. The Earth's climate is designed to redistribute energy. The sun hits at the equator. That's where the Earth is the warmest. And the Earth's weather, which become weather patterns, that's climate, distribute the heat from the equator to the poles and from the lower atmosphere to the upper atmosphere. If we did not have greenhouse gases, the Earth would be uninhabitable, because at night we would see all the infrared rays from the sun that came in the day would escape, and the Earth would become very cold. The fact that we have greenhouse gases allows the Earth to stay warm enough in the night that again it can get warm in the daytime. But see, the left does not want you to believe, and a whole chapter called A Big Wake Up for the Left, Sun Heats Earth. The major factor of our temperature on Earth is the sun. And when the sun gets burning hotter, the Earth has a warmer climate. When the sun is less active, the Earth's climate gets cooler. In this little ice age in the Napoleonic era, the sun was dormant. That's why it occurred. It had nothing to do with carbon dioxide. And again, the lies told here are endemic. The left does not care any longer about telling the truth. And I'm going to be explaining this in the books I'm writing and in the podcasts, try to get this out. Now, the basic point is, I'm probably going to write more right now than I've ever written in my life. I'm writing some books I think are going to be legacy books. And those of you who think I'm here to sell books, that's fine. But I want you to read them because they are telling you the truth. And if you start thinking, these books are not going to be necessarily easy to read. But if you start thinking again and understanding the climate science, you won't be duped by what we have today as disinformation, which predominates. And this disinformation is fundamentally what we call news. It's all basically ideology, and it takes God out of the equation. We're living in a secular time with a secular religion, and I think that's extremely dangerous. I'm trying to prevent it. I've decided to come back active again in order to see if we can't prevent this from happening. I don't promise you that it can be prevented. But I always say in the end, God always wins. And let's see that it takes us to be involved. But I'm confident that if we get involved, we can turn this back. Now, my producer, Chris, is my new producer. Chris, do you want to comment on this before I segue to the next subject?
Oh, I have to tell you, you mentioned in the very beginning that a lot of young people have learned about global warming and how it was going to end the world. All these predictions. You can laugh at the Greta 2023 prediction, but if anybody was listening to the Al Gore lining one's own portfolio predictions of the mid to late 2000s, one would have catched on by now. I grew up in the 1970s. 1970s, they taught conservation of the earth and resources along with global warming. The idea was they tied it together, which produced the first generation of climate change, let's say worrywarts, not quite alarmists. That generation, our generation, created the alarmists. But the fact is, you tie a political agenda to something as noble as put your garbage in the garbage can, recycle cans, and grow things in the garden, but take care of them. Just don't screw up the air with pesticides unless you really, really need them as a farmer. And at that point, they were making clean pesticides or working on that sort of thing. Having said all of that, you tie the noble ideas into the political ideas, and it makes the political ideas seem noble. And therefore, we have a new generation of virtue signalers who learned from the alarmists beforehand, who learned from the worrywarts of my generation.
Well, I mean, you're making a good point. I think we want to be good stewards of the earth. We don't
exactly,
want to
and we should be.
We should be.
Right.
But the point is that burning hydrocarbon fuels, and I point out consistently, I've done this for now 20 years, trying to get people to understand that hydrocarbon fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, these are not fossil fuels. They're natural products of the earth. They're made on a continuous basis. And I show you the chemistry of how that's the case in this book, The Truth About Global Warming, Truth About Energy, Climate Change, and Global Warming. But the point is, because we have, yes, legitimate environmental goals to be good stewards of the earth, it does not mean that human beings are inherently destructive and we are our own cause of extinction. We're just the latest creatures walking around on the surface of the earth. As far as the earth is concerned, we're recent arrivals. The earth has had 5 extinctions, including the dinosaurs being gone 65 million years ago. Dinosaurs weren't using any hydrocarbon fuels at all.
But they weren't paying attention to climate change because they were allowing
right.
the cows to pass gas, right? Was that the case?
Oh, yes, now we're back into the cows with methane. I mean, it's ridiculous. The earth went through cataclysmic change. The extinctions occurred when asteroids hit the earth, as did 65 million years ago, when we had 1,000 years of sulfuric oxide thrown into the atmosphere because we had volcanoes going on in India for 1,000 years. These are the kinds of events that eliminated the dinosaurs. Burning a little bit more hydrocarbon fuels is not going to mean that we are bad stewards of the earth. And again, these are the ways that the ideas that the left is generating are cleverly designed, basically alarmist lies aimed at having fewer people on the earth, having a less productive lifestyle on earth, being not able to support the number of the billions of people we have on Earth today. And that's really the underlying agenda. Now, let's switch to this next article on the banks, because, again, I want to cover this, and they really go together. In a sense, we're now seeing that there are 186 banks that are being reported are equally insolvent to Silicon Valley Bank. And I think the agenda here really is to eliminate the small banks, the community banks, the regional banks, to end up with a few giant banks, maybe 5 or 6, which in the United States will be global banks, because they will be the ones who would be in charge of the central bank digital currency. The central bank digital currency is introduced. The governments will be able to control everything everyone does on Earth with money, including if they don't like you, they don't like your opinions, they can social credit score you as they do in China, and you won't have access to your digital currency. This is a legitimate and real threat, because they are setting targets for the United States to, maybe even by 2025, 2 years from now, have a central bank digital currency that replaces the dollar. So we have the Federal Reserve engaged in essentially an intentional destruction of the economy. And I think basically the dollar is at risk of not being able to survive. The dollar may crash. We're already facing inflation that's being reported in the ranges 8 or 8.5%, when it's, I think, more dramatically in double digits already. The reporting of the federal government has minimized many of these issues in order to not scare the American public. But what we experienced in the 1970s with Jimmy Carter was that, again, there was an oil crisis. Just like right now today, we have this climate change, which is an attack on oil, natural gas, coal, all of which the youth of the country are being taught are evil, dirty. There really is no clean energy. There's nothing clean about electricity. There's nothing clean about wind or solar, or dirty about carbon. Carbon is a natural element. Our bodies include a lot of carbon. We couldn't exist without carbon. It's not inherently evil and bad. If we exhaled, if the emissions were carbon monoxide from hydrocarbon fuels, we'd have an issue. As carbon monoxide is poisonous. Carbon dioxide we exhale, it's not poison, it's plant food. Now, when you get back to the banks, what we experienced in Carter was the energy crisis, which then led to inflation, but also it slowed down the economy because higher energy costs became a detriment to economic growth. What's going on right now is also a combination of Jimmy Carter and what we experienced under 2008, 2009 with the subprime mortgage crisis, when, again, the Democrats passed legislation where those who couldn't afford houses had to get mortgages anyway. They put those mortgages into mortgage-backed securities, which are investment instruments, which the banks and investors were taught were safe, couldn't fail. And then when the subprime mortgages began to go under because people couldn't pay, shouldn't have ever gotten a mortgage, couldn't pay their mortgages, they defaulted. Well, then the securities crashed. Banks were holding the securities in their asset base. The banks lost these assets. There were derivatives made on it. You know, the derivatives are bets, very sophisticated bets, like credit default swaps, which are done by the International Bank of Settlements. Very few people understand them, but they are, a very sophisticated form of security which hedges against credit defaults. So in other words, if credit defaults start happening, this instrument's supposed to kick in and provide money. It only does it when there's credit defaults. That's how derivatives are created. When the derivatives go, there's a huge number of derivatives. That's what brought down Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns in 2008, 2009. The derivatives went bad. Now, we've got the same kind of house of cards today. And I'm saying that this is going to be a Great Depression. It's why, Chris, if we could show the cover of another book I've written, and I'm trying to put this in print as much as I can. If you listen to the podcast, you're going to get so much. If you read the books, you'll get more. I'm going to post articles on the website every day, new articles that update these issues that I'm concerned about. Again, it's the whole idea of much of the politics we're dealing with today, DeSantis, this issue, that issue, these are the distractions so people don't think about the really serious issues that are going on, the fundamental, the Great Reset, that these pandemics which re-architect society, a lockdown which we've never had historically in the course of human history, this kind of a lockdown which ended economic activity. Well, now we've got a government that has trillions of dollars of fiat currency. The Biden administration seems to be spending like crazy. We're sending billions over to the Ukraine, which I'm confident is being stolen. Biden did that even when he was vice president, and his Burisma company that his son was in. I'll be writing more about that, I believe, on the Gateway Pundit. So what I'm saying is, if what we're doing in this website and podcast, the Truth Central, if you care to support us, the sponsors are here. If we take a look at the Swiss America sponsor, I've worked with Swiss America since 2004. They're the company I trust most in delivering legitimately gold, silver, platinum to you. It's a very efficient company, run very well. They have free publications as well. They have an offer for silver dollars, half dollars, Walking Liberty half dollars, sold virtually at the value of the silver within them for first-time buyers, first-time customers. But again, I'm recommending for everybody that you should have some gold and silver, because there could be a day when you can't access your central bank currencies. There could be a day when you can't access that's the Walking Liberty half dollar offer right there. When everything's electronic, all the internet's great. We're dependent on the internet right now. You can have food, lunch delivered to your door, dinner delivered to your door. You can get a car to come and pick you up. You can schedule your airplane flights. You can look at the train schedules. You can read the news. You can watch the sports, all on the internet. What happens when they unplug the internet? Without electricity, where would any of this be? And if we're going to have to be dependent to have electricity on wind and solar, the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time, and even Europe is now going back to using natural gas and abandoning much of their green agenda. That's why these articles are appearing in the Washington Post about don't be a climate doomer, that there's nothing we can do, so why bother? That's what the Washington Post doesn't want you thinking. But the point is, I want people not to be woke. I want people to be awake. I want people to think. Because what you're getting is architected news designed to engineer your behavior, and engineer your behavior in a way in which you just accept whatever you're being told by the news agencies, which are dominated by the federal government. It's one of my books. I'm writing 3 books on this truth about global energy, global warming, and climate change. Well, tomorrow I'll show you the cover of the second one. It's going to be about the truth on neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy. It's going into print because the entire political philosophy of the left is oriented around a neo-Marxist idea that is headed towards this transhumanism, that we can perfect human beings and there's only a small minority that deserve to survive with their machines. That'll be the 3rd book in this trilogy, which I'm calling the Great Awakening trilogy. I've come back to the podcast because I do think there is a chance for a Great Awakening. I believe it will involve and necessitate the involvement of God. And I want to do what I can to prepare the message and to explain to people how you can get yourself from being influenced by woke thinking to become awake and come back to the reality of human existence, which can flourish. If we go with the woke, we're going to end up with millions of people being killed, maybe billions. Chris, any final comments before we end today?
Well, I'll tell you this, it it was amazing how Joe Biden, the president, quickly came out after the first, collapses of SVB and Signature Bank saying there will be no bailouts, but they found a way to work it out. I understand they're trying to say the private sector did this or that, but I believe they're also kind of trying to cover for certain banks which fell into their woke hiring practices, which is another story for another day. But you did say don't fall for the woke philosophy, don't fall for the climate change philosophy. This is part of your mantra, and we see all of this playing out in the bank sector and the finance sector. You can't just throw somebody in because they fill a quota. I am perfectly fine with somebody who is very different from a regular or what we consider normal in a position of power if they can handle the job, not to show off or pat yourself on the back. And look at what they were investing in. You brought up the ninja loans of the 1990s, which caused the 2007 credit crunch. People call it 2008 crash, but it was the 2007 credit crunch that turned into the 2008 crash. But you saw this irresponsible lending practices, irresponsible risk management practices have hurt the banking industry several times. Either people don't learn their lessons from it, or they're trying to engineer, as you said, a crash or a situation where we're going to have maybe a few major companies running the whole thing.
A good summary. Thank you. This is the Truth Central. And I want to decode these various lies you're being told so that you can open your mind. That does take some work, take some reading, take some thinking. But if you do, you'll find how these lies have been constructed to create a reality which is designed to engineer you into slavery. This is Jerome Corsi. Today is Tuesday, March 28th, 2023. In the end, God always wins. I do fear today what in the end means, what we're going to have to go through, but God will win here too. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. God bless.